Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to Icarus. This is episode 2, and in today's episode, I wanted to tackle some of the bigger, more draft, kind of broad aspects of creating our station building. So this is going to be, like, no doubt the biggest building in the whole area, and not only the biggest building, but also the hardest one to make, mostly because almost every single room, at least on the main floor where the coaster is, will be, interior decorated, and it's going to have path walking through it. The queue's going to go through it. We're going to have lots of theming inside, and doing like an indoor themed building that has like usable interior just always takes like way longer than exterior, or at least I found that out after doing this. So you're going to see quite a bit of planning for that, and a bit of introductory work on the beginning of the station, detailing on the inside. But the main thing for this episode is tackle the main like station room, so the little queue area right in front of that, and then lay out a lot of the paths and the tiles for the floors that we're going to have for the rest of the building that will come later on, and also lots of walls. Get some different kind of motifs that'll be seen throughout this building, sort of built out and setting aside, so we can use those as we continue building the building later on. Now you might have noticed there that I just did the first little part, which was making the tiling. Now that floor tiling will be used quite a bit, mostly in the main station room, and then a little bit on like the outside areas. But I took a lot of inspiration with this station in particular from like Spanish architecture or Italian architecture. So you're going to see some like nice kind of white or beige tiling. We're going to have like orange brick, and mostly that for like the main floor level. Now we're gonna go from there and do some more fantasy oriented stuff towards the top of the building, but that'll all be the stuff that is I guess non-interior, so we don't have to have any actual usable space on the inside. It'll be a little bit easier to make like big crazy spires and towers and stuff like that for the top part. But just to start off here, you can see we put down the flooring, and I'm now starting on what will be the large, like, I guess it's like a dome. Well, it's not really a dome structure. It's more like just a big tower. And this is like the first sort of experimental try at doing something like this. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, this is my first time doing a lot of stuff. And for me, this is my first time using this little like rotation kind of technique. So where essentially you can just place one object, a certain distance from the center pivot point, and then you can copy it, put it on the other side, and then you can just select both sides of the object and rotate them and create like big circular objects. So this is good for stuff like towers, but it's also really good in the future for really anything that's symmetrical, that you can just continue to rotate around itself, and maybe just build one piece of it instead of building the whole thing and rotating each object individually, which takes forever. So you'll see this technique used quite a bit later in this series, but you can see that the baseline of it's being laid out. Now the nice thing about our tiling here is that since we're not using these giant, default square floor pieces, we can be really, really flexible with how the flooring's laid out. So in that particular area next to the station over there, we can easily just, remove tiles and move things around and make it easier to shape right up against this giant kind of odd shape, which is like a big curve. And so again, that was like a really integral part of this building, was making sure that almost every single floor and roof piece that we have is made out of other smaller objects that we can manipulate and change to make a little more organic of a building. So you'll see that a lot, and you'll also just see building in general that I think is hopefully creating challenge. I know that when I started this, I was thinking, okay, I want to have as many interesting shapes that the game doesn't really want to let you make as possible in this building, and I think I even got a little over my head later on in this project. A lot of things weren't lined up properly, or they were lined up properly, but just getting them all to align and come together was a little bit of a challenge. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind if you want to do something like this. It's just the more things that you have that are kind of going off grid or that are intersecting, it gets really challenging to finish off the building, especially if you have an interior. If you have like an exterior and no interior, you're just making like non-functional buildings, and the inside's just hollow. This is a much easier thing to do, but whenever you can't have walls intersecting each other because you can't have stuff on the inside just like kind of plopping through, it's a little bit more difficult to work with. So yeah, we'll see that later on. But here I'm just making a few staircases. Again, I'm trying to shape out different pieces we can use later on with the same sort of tile texture. So whether that be the staircase over here or this second building over on this side. And right now what I'm doing actually is even making some diagonal pieces so we can have just not just square objects and things to work with here. So just making the piece set right now for this building. Now, I'm pretty happy actually with how these tiles turned out. They were really fun to work with. I was a little bit concerned because you can see that what I'm using for the tiles themselves are these like molding pieces that are like, coincidentally like the most high poly molding piece you can possibly find. I use that one because the texture is like super high def. For some reason, that one's texture is like really high resolution, and the ones next to it that have less polys, I guess, are just not nearly as high res. So I wanted to use this one, and as a result, a bit more of a bit more expensive poly-wise, but I'm not really that concerned because I only really use it in the flooring for a couple rooms, and of course we're not going to use this anywhere we're not going to have people, so it shouldn't be a problem other than that. Now, this building over here, I started and I actually built quite a bit inside of it, but as of recording this episode anyway, this was all still when I was kind of new to designing the interior and really what I wanted to do. I didn't really get as creative as I wanted to with a lot of this stuff, so I'm showing you the basic stuff and the things that I sort of designed for this room, but after I started detailing it for a little while, I ended up kind of focusing on other stuff and moving away from it, and I didn't really want to show all of the detailing because I'm probably going to go back and make it much better. So to start, I wanted to have a couple different like big shelving units for what's going to be like a big storage room. So like lots of big shelves that are going to hold like a whole bunch of different objects and things. Now this room isn't going to be just only for storage. I want to have it look like it's also like a workshop kind of thing. And this is the other reason why I didn't want to detail it too much beyond this, is because as of recording this episode, we didn't have the newest update yet, which has the billboards and the fireworks and all that stuff. So the main kind of component behind this is going to be that this big workshop is like full of all these blueprints and like rough drafts of inventions and things and all this crazy stuff. I want it to feel like this weird like fantasy workshop where this guy's just like designing these crazy weird inventions and wacky stuff. So I wanted to have like a whole bunch of blueprints all over the walls with the billboards, and blueprints and papers all over the floor and like on his desk. And I think that that's going to be like such an essential part of this building that it really didn't make a lot of sense to continue from there. So I just made the basic stuff, just these little stackable different shelving units, and they're all of different size too. So we're going to have these bigger ones, and then later on some smaller ones that just hold like smaller things like books and whatnot. But we'll come back to that room later. I'm just going to cut the rest of that out and jump back to the main building. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. You can see that we're working with, well, maybe you can see, we're working with two different buildings here. So there's a building on the right-hand side that I'm in right now. You can see the grid doesn't really match up with the left-hand side. And the reason for that is these flooring tiles that I made for this, they're actually based off of, or they're sitting on top of an actual grid floor object, which I can easily delete and then, obviously manipulate the floor so it looks a bit more seamless against things like big curves and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's still on a grid piece, and that's really important because when I go to plop it down in different places, I want it to just plop in each grid spot as it should, and it makes it easy to put all these down so I don't have to align every single floor piece as I put it down. Now the problem with that is to get these two to go right up against the coaster station like that, I needed to have two different buildings, and that's not a big deal if the buildings are like offset and they're going to kind of go into each other anyway, but these buildings are meant to be one singular building. So you can see where areas where like the walls are supposed to connect, especially above the coaster there and all that stuff. Those areas are really hard to work with because they're not on the same grid, and I have to just like intersect walls and make it look like the whole thing is one single object. It's not a huge deal right now, and you only really notice it probably, but it did take a whole lot of work afterwards on my part, just to make sure that everything lined up properly. And it did certainly get harder later on whenever I realized that these two buildings that I'm using to create one building are just ever so slightly off in rotation, and there's just not a fine enough like adjustment amount to make them exactly lined up. So it's just going to be challenging later on, and that's why I pretty much just, once I was done building this building out to this staircase over here, that's where it sort of ends and new buildings sort of shape up in different angles. That way we don't get this misalignment, you know, spreading out too far beyond just this little area in the middle. And again, it wasn't a huge deal, it was just kind of a pain to work with earlier on and some more work for myself. So maybe take that as some as like a word of advice, just to avoid doing stuff like that, because it was certainly not fun to work with. Now this next piece will be our first roof piece for this building. Now I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of roof pieces like this, I think, that are this shallow and you know, kind of a gradual slope. This will be for the lower areas that are much more like Spanish and Italian sort of inspired. So, you know, very gradual slope in the roof, and it'll be on the lower levels kind of closer to the station itself. And then as we get further and further up into the sky, we're gonna have more like spires and steep slopes and all that stuff that'll come later on. But I think that by having the roofs gradually get steeper, you get this like illusion, or what's the word, like forced perspective on the building. So we'll try and do that as we continue later on. But for this piece, it's very simple. I've just got, you can see those wooden posts on the bottom. We've got like an underside of wooden planks. And the idea is to make something that looks nice from the outside, but also something that will be sort of visually appealing from the inside, so we can actually have this roof piece be the underside roof as well. So that's where all these little wooden pieces come into play down here, and I'm going to try and rotate them and, you know, make them look a little bit different from each other, so they're not all just like one repeated texture on the underside. Now, the difficult part about this, and I just skipped the whole thing because it's kind of tedious and I don't want to show you guys the process, but is trying to get that piece to be in the building of the other building on the right hand side there. So the difficult part about that is, in this game, the way that you would go about taking a scenery object in one building and putting it in another building is you can just mass select all those scenery objects. You can click remove from building, and then you can use the multi-tool to select those objects again, select the new building, and then click add to building, and then now those objects are within that building. The problem with this is, what you can't do right now is, anytime that that little collection of objects has a grid object inside of it, you can't use this little trick. So and it makes sense, right? Because these grid objects are like inherently a part of the original building's grid. So whenever you remove it from that original building, it becomes its own building instead of just being like a collection of scenery objects. So whenever you mass select it, you can't just add it as scenery to another building. What I'd like to see, however, is, I think it'd be awesome if you could select one building, like say that little roof piece that I removed from our original building. When it's its own building, I could select that one, then I could select a new building and then click add to building, and then this this building that I'm adding to our new building would essentially just like, it would kind of snap to the new grid, it would rotate to the new grid, and then it would be like in plop mode, and I could just kind of plop it on the grid and it'd become like a part of this new building, or this, I guess, this existing building. That would be awesome. It's not possible right now, and I wonder if they'll ever do that, but it would be kind of an elegant solution to it, because right now it's kind of a pain to move actual building objects within the inside of another building. But I don't know if they'll ever do that. It's kind of weird. The mechanics of the buildings just kind of makes that sort of a hard thing to do, and I know it's a very, very, very specific issue that I don't see them really addressing anytime soon, but it'd be cool if that was a feature. I don't know, just a little thing that I was thinking of while I was painstakingly copying every single object from that original one, and then you know, rotating onto the right grid of the new building, and then trying to very, very meticulously rotate it so that it was exactly on grid. It was a bit of a pain, but you know, aside from all that, let's jump into the next part. So this is the portion of the station that I actually wanted to completely finish for this episode, because I think it's kind of boring to have an episode where we just have only planning and no actual finished components, so you can't see anything, you know, actually looking nice. So this area here is going to be a big pergola kind of thing. So from the inside, we're going to have these big wooden beams that kind of cross from this part just overhead of the loading zone over to the other side of this wall. And then we'll have some like hanging garden stuff going on and just a whole bunch of different wood elements and features. And you're going to see like from this point on, I think after building this pergola, I started to realize like how important it is. And I know this is all not new stuff. Like I'm saying things that I learned but have been sort of known in the community for a long time, so don't take that as anything less than it is. But I'd say in this game in particular, definitely using the objects that are scenery objects that you can free move wherever you want that are on the grid is the way to go. Like you definitely want to use those objects as much as you possibly can. I would say, only use grid objects when you absolutely have to, when things have to stay on grid or when they have to be like actual, core building components. But the further I get into this project, the more I find myself just using these free move objects to simplify and give myself more creativity when it comes to, or I guess creative freedom is what I'm trying to say, when it comes to detailing these areas. Now, this little thing up here, I actually thought was pretty cool. I wanted to have little like lane identifiers for the loading area, and obviously this is before billboards, so now that we have billboards I could have just done that instead, but this is before that was even announced, and I was actually super happy with this. So it's gonna stay. I'm not gonna move it. I think it's awesome. But this is just like a little loading lane identifier area using these really basic signs, just adding each little number individually, and then I'll add some different scenery components that sort of block out the middle section so it looks like it's these little hanging signs that are branching off to the side a little bit, which I think are kind of cool. And of course, we'll use the same, wood textures all the way through. So all of this wood kind of matches, and it feels like it's all one big structure. And you're going to see that a lot in this area in particular, because we have all this like white stucco kind of stuff that's honestly just, it's kind of a flat texture. It's not very interesting. And I didn't want to have too much of that in a row. So we're going to have a whole bunch of different wood components that are kind of coming in and out to sort of break that up a little bit. Now, with these little entry things, I felt like we should have something interesting going on here. Like it was just kind of like a boring, generic themed one, and I wanted to have my own theme. So I'm going to go ahead and create these little like wooden support structures that once I completely cover up this thing, I think turned out pretty nice actually. You can hardly even tell that it was originally like the default themed thing. Once we have all this wood stuff on top of it, but as we go right now, you can see it doesn't look very good at the moment, but I think once we sort of shell off everything, it looks much better. And I'll do this with the exit as well, of course. It won't be just the entrance area, but trying to remove as much of the vanilla stuff as possible and make the whole thing look as custom as we possibly can. Now, this is where we get to the interior detailing. So I had this idea, and to be totally honest, when I started building this, I was really nervous because I thought it might be too out there and too weird, but I think it would be pretty cool if this interior area, specifically just this area where the coaster is this like crazy like indoor outdoor theme. So there's like all this rock work, there's some waterfalls, there's like lots of vines and I guess just foliage everywhere. I wanted to get with that as much as possible, but I didn't want it to look just like unrealistic. Like it seemed like it should at least be plausible, like you could actually build this in a real theme park. So I tried my best anywhere there was a water feature to make it seem like it was all going into a little pool somewhere, and we're gonna have like a little drains and stuff, so it looks like it's not just water violently flying into the floor and damaging the entire building or whatever. I didn't want it to look like that, so we'll try to cover that up as much as possible. Use these little components to make it seem like there's drains and whatnot, and it's not just like random water everywhere. And I didn't want to overdo it with this either. I know it would be super easy to just fill everything with foliage and make it seem like this whole area is just covered in trees and stuff, but I wanted it again to seem like the trees were growing out of very specific areas that were designed by whoever made this like big, I guess, queue area, and make it plausible again, so it's not just totally out there. It's got to be at least somewhat realistic to an extent. So we'll have lots of vines and lots of foliage, but this is really the only room that I wanted to do this with. And then I think each room, each like different area of the queue is going to have sort of a different, not really a different theme to it, but a different feel to it for sure. So like this room here is going to be very foliage and pretty out there fantasy themed. And then as we get away from this room into other rooms, we're going to have like different little rooms that will be basically just actual rooms that you would see in like some sort of giant mansion. So, you know, we talked earlier about that giant warehouse. I'm thinking like a big study or something somewhere, and, you know, like a sunroom, maybe just different little rooms that you would maybe imagine seeing in a giant fantasy castle like this. So we'll get to those later on, but this one is pretty undisputedly the most far out there and kind of wild room that I think we designed of this whole area over here. And again, I'm trying to make it seem like these areas where the rocks are sitting are at least, you know, they were designed like this. We got like wooden paneling just below it where all of the rocks are, so it kind of seems like they're setting down on something like that. Also to kind of break up that tile texture that's all over the place. And then we'll do that over here as well near this little waterfall. And this won't be the only waterfall. I'm going to have, I think, one more on the other side, but that might come a little bit later on as we are getting a little bit near the end of this episode here. But I just wanted to at least finish off this room so you can see what it was going to look like and get a little idea of what the theme of this station room will be as we continue on with the series and we add more stuff to it. So I think the other thing that would be really nice is, I know there's an option when you're making paths, you can like remove the curb, but you can only remove the curb if it's on the ground. If it's an elevated path, you can remove the railing, but you can't remove the curb, which kind of sucks because it'd be nice if you could just have absolutely no trace of pathing whatsoever. It's just like completely invisible and covered up by the textures and the objects that you choose. But it's not really how this game works, so I had to kind of work with those curbs later on to make this whole room still look like it's completely designed out of objects and it doesn't have like vanilla stuff in it as much. So we'll see that later on anyway. I don't know. It'd be nice if there's a feature like that though, I think. But anyway, using a whole bunch of these vines, especially on the top of this pergola up here. The only thing about these is obviously they're 2D, so they are pretty much invisible if you look at them directly sideways, which is fine, but you got to be very careful about where you use them. And I think this is like one of the only times where you can have them like free floating is if they're up in the ceiling, where when you look up you're gonna see just the flat texture of it, so it still looks like it's three-dimensional. But it's very hard to use these as like hanging inside of a room, just because it starts to look like flat pieces and it looks a little odd. So I tried to use these bushes upside down alongside the little different pieces. Now there aren't a whole lot of scenery objects when it comes to foliage variety, but I tried to get as much variety in here as possible and use different pieces in ways that maybe aren't supposed to be used all the time to get some more variety in our foliage here. But we are nearing the end of this episode, so hopefully you can see at least what this area is going to turn out to look like, and we'll certainly be expanding on this theme in the next episode over towards the other half of the station here. And I think actually the next episode will be completely finishing off the station and kind of shaping up the roof and all that stuff around this area, because that certainly is an interesting challenge to tackle. You'll see a little bit at the end of this episode and definitely into the beginning of the next episode that roofing and finishing off this whole building is a little bit wonky, a little bit weird to work with because of the different various buildings that are associated with this area over here. So anyway, that's it for this episode. Hope you all enjoyed. We'll cut over to some shots of the I guess finished area so far, so you can kind of observe it from a less sped up angle, and then we'll jump back in next time with more work on the station and everything else. So hope you all enjoyed, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.